A lot of people talk about sleep issues on that diet as well, sugar fasting and having a hard time with sleep. Did you run into any sleep issues when you did your Fairy Princess protocol?
Fairy Princess, no, because you have first of all, I always did tons and tons of gelatin. And some people really miss out on that. They
I
do the
thought fairy
sugar
princes
fast.
are very busy at night doing all kinds of blessings and helping people with their wishes and stuff. They're not night owls? Not on this diet, huh? You go to sleep at a good hour?
On this side, you should be sleeping like a baby.
Our neighbor's choice.
Well, we've got a great discussion in store today. Someone who's been a great influencer for the bioenergetic world and health and nutrition. Veronica joins me. How you doing?
Hello. Well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to have you on in the
Thank you
podcast
so much.
world. Usually we've seen you on X or Twitter, and you've
Mhm.
been doing a lot to promote the ideas of metabolic supremacy, as you call it. That's what your page starts off with when we go to your X, Celestial Being with a one instead of a I there on
It was
being.
just taken. I had to do something.
Yeah. You start off with you're saying, let me out doctrinate you. So tell me a little bit about where this comes from, this idea of out doctrinating what we hear from the mainstream.
Sure, of course. So I believe that the vast majority of people, even the ones in the so-called known,
Mm.
the ones that think they, have escaped the wokeism or red pilled, even those people, I don't think they necessarily still know what they're doing. So they would, you probably know that even in the red sort of pill community, the carnivore diet or all those diets are extremely popular, and I don't think they are doing people any good. And
Right.
that's sort of and not to mention obviously the average person who is indoctrinated by the mainstream media. So
Right.
um, I think the vast majority of people, I would say 99%, do need indoctrination, and sort of a serious one.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Now you're in London, correct?
Yes. That's,
So is that your context for experiencing most of your life? Did you grow up there? Is that what you call home, or is that something new? This area?
I call London home at the
Yeah.
moment. I grew up in Poland, very close to Krakow, um, and moved to London as a teenager to study law at the university, and I've been living in London ever since, and my family is in London at the moment. My friends and
Yeah.
everything that I hold dear is in England.
Right. So do a lot of the censorship or the kind of indoctrination that you talk about, do you think of it from the general, the British way of doing it, or do you see it kind of in the general American influenced context that we think about? Because I know it's a whole different ball game over there. You can get arrested for things you say on Facebook or whatever.
Oh
Things like
yes, 100%.
yeah,
And I think a lot of the influence, dietary and otherwise, comes from you guys.
right,
And also, my entire sort of audience on Twitter X is American. Is different on Instagram, and so the American influence, we sort of we kind of almost look up to you, like whatever those guys over the pond are doing at the moment. It's kind of influencing, and it has a huge impact on things over here. um, but with regards to yeah, as you mentioned, it's the freedom of speech is kind of non-existent
right,
um, over here. You can definitely get arrested for
right.
saying the wrong things.
So when
Mm.
you were younger, did you want to get involved with health, or did you have another topic of interest that was driving you?
hmm Well, I grew up with skinheads
Yeah,
and political sort of rebels, and
yeah,
we organized demonstrations and protests. Um, I could probably show you some pictures. I had this sort of really short hair. I was wearing those, Dr. Martens shoes, and just organizing
yeah,
protests. And
yeah.
that was my entire life. So one time I remember I was 11 or 12, and I was this writer. Had a sort of a poetry or like a reading of his
Mhm.
work, and I knew because of my family, or like, well, I just knew that his family was deeply, deeply sort of associated with communism before, and so
Mhm.
we would storm the reading and would sort of call him out. How dare
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
Not like that, but
yeah,
like, could you please talk about your involvement in like the regime and killing off your brothers, your
yeah,
neighbors. Now you're sort of like behaving like nothing has happened, but so I did all those things. I would sometimes would lie to my parents that I'm going to, like, I don't know, some school trip,
yeah,
but we would organize demonstrations and protests and instead. So that
yeah.
was, yeah, that was my sort of thing growing up, and not much has changed.
Yeah. So you mentioned on your ex before that you're influenced by people like Murray Rothbard or Hans Hermann Hoppe. These are people that come from a libertarian anarchist, kind of a paleo libertarian world. These are people usually associated with the von Mises Institute here in not too far from me in Alabama. So how did that whole scene get into your zeitgeist where you were at? You said you're hang around skinheads. Some of those skinheads don't like Murray Rothbard either. So
No, no, no. So that was more sort of uh, being more kind of national
right.
throughout my teenage years. I started, I guess, reading libertarian literature later on at the age of 18, I would say, and it made sense. You know, I don't think being governed, or like, I don't think anyone apart from God has, the has the authority over an individual. It's just not something that I agree
Right.
with.
Right.
Um, mhm.
Interesting. So then how do we get to you discovering Ray Peat and what has become what you're known for now on your platform where you've been able to influence a lot of folks to look at
Sure.
the world of Ray Peat?
Mhm. Well, after arriving in London, Um, I would say I was a little chubby as a teenager growing up. I just like to eat a lot, and
Hmm.
I was fed by my grandma and by my aunties, and
Hmm.
and I was just healthy, but like in a
Yeah.
way not sort of model skinny as I wanted to. And so after arriving in London, I thought the girls around me are kind of skinny and beautiful, and oh, like that sort of. I never paid attention to it beforehand. And so I started dieting, and one thing led to another. I lost a lot of weight, of course, and a few months down the line, I was eating 800 calories to maintain. After okay, maybe not a few months, but like after a year and a bit, I had to eat like 800 calories to maintain my weight, and that went on for about, well, almost 10 years actually. Terrible consequences. I lost my period, was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome, insulin resistance. I was exhausted. I was
Were you doing
really
one
bad.
were you doing one type of diet the whole time for 10 years or all kinds of different things?
No, so it started off actually with it was called the South Beach diet, I think.
Hmm.
You're just not allowed to eat sugars, fruits, vegetables, and lean protein were fine.
Hmm.
But when I stopped seeing results, that was actually the time that Prince William and Kate Middleton were getting married, and she revealed that she went on the Dukan diet before her wedding to lose some weight. And the Dukan diet was just pure protein, no fats, no starches, no sugars, nothing, just pure protein. So imagine steamed chicken breast, tinned tuna in water, egg whites, egg yolks probably a little too fatty. So then I went on that kind of diet, and I did that for a year and a bit. And that was still 800 calories or 900 calories of just pure protein. Wow. You can imagine the damage was severe.
Right. So for 10 years, you were just,
starving
going
myself.
into this. That's like a rabbit. Was that called rabbit starvation or something they call that, where you just eat, you can't survive on protein alone?
Yes, it was pretty brutal, and I was quite strict with it. Then developed an eating disorder in a sense that like bulimia type thing. So I would eat a little bit more, then go to the bathroom, and that went on for like 10 years. And then COVID hit, and for the first time since I lived on my own in this tiny shoebox type flat apartment in London, and I thought, well, no one will see me. We've got like a fake, obviously, but pandemic going on, and people are at home. What if I try to understand how my brain works, and I don't think I'm diseased? That's what the psychiatrist had told me for 10 years. I don't think it is anything to do with my childhood. My childhood was pretty great. I just think it was, I'm just hungry, and that's why I do those things. And so I started reading up on things, and the recovery took me, I don't know, a few days, honestly, once I understood how things worked. And I understood I had to eat a little bit more. But because my metabolism was so low, I was gaining weight on, let's say, 1,500 calories, on 1,200 calories. And so I did gain a lot of weight. And shortly afterwards, when I could travel again, I didn't get vaccinated or anything like that. And so when I could travel again, I went to first to Switzerland, then to Sweden to stay with some friends and to get better. And I was still doing sort of raw meat and reading up on that, and sort of following people like the raw meat people, I guess. And but things were not.
Was that enjoyable at all? I mean, doing the only raw meat. I mean, what are we talking here?
Not just raw meat, but mainly. I think yes. I mean, I grew up eating steak tartare. Since since I was tiny, and so that was really enjoyable. But
was that the guy? I had a guy on named Josh Rayner, and he had this. He was following this raw thing that he almost died because he was eating raw meat and he didn't drink the green juice. Was that the same? It's some strange man's name. I can't remember the name of it right now. Vander, something with a van. There's a van in there.
Not aware of any
not the same one. Okay.
Maybe not the same thing, but mostly raw foods, and things were not improving all that much.
Yeah.
I wasn't really losing weight. That was, but also I was still, I still had the brain fog. I was exhausted. I was tired. It was just I always had to have a nap a couple times a day almost, and then, well, I came across this one circadian biologist type person, and even though he wasn't necessarily a huge fan of Ray Peat, we got really friendly, online only, but really friendly. And so he told me, why don't you start eating sugar? And why don't you take progesterone and thyroid hormones? And I was like, interesting. Is that going to help? Well, it's and he never mentioned their name, Ray Peat. I guess those guys are just they think that they're so much better for some reason. But then a few months afterwards, I saw the first raw carrot meme, and things kind of started making sense. And I could never get thyroid hormones in Sweden, even with like my British doctor international prescription. And I could get T4, but I didn't end up taking it, perhaps for the better. But once I returned to London, well, I had to return. I had to go back to London because a family member, I found out they had leukemia. And then I really got into Ray Peat. I remember starting Twitter mostly to ask Georgie Dinkov of all people for help for my family member. And I started tweeting out of that despair. I was living on a reclining chair next to my family member's hospital bed while they're going through, their treatment. And I was just so angry and felt so powerless, and started tweeting out of that sort of anger. And it took off for some reason. But because I wanted to help them and also help myself, that was just repeat loads of reading. And as I was reading and learning, I was tweeting, and it's just things happened. That's my story.
Yeah, that's very cool. So let's go back to some of the first things you said. They were trying to convince you that you had some kind of psychological problem when really you were just hungry. You said, how many cases, or how many people who think they have some kind of psychiatric disorder or psychological problem, or maybe they're so either they're diagnosed, or even they may have something but they're undiagnosed. How much of that do you think is because they're hungry? Because that's a vast difference in terms of solutions.
Yes. Well, I can speak for bulimia. I don't believe it's a sort of a mental issue. Well, it is, but those things are interconnected. I think it's a stress issue, of course. You usually sort of develop bulimia after a prolonged period of dieting. And so obviously your body is so stressed that it almost develops this kind of starvation prevention mechanism. And because those kind of signals, they stem from this almost animalistic part of the brain, responsible for kind of like survival and like the sort of instincts that you don't think about. It's so strong and it's compelling, but it stems from a stressed organism trying to survive. That's what I've learned. And once I realized that, recovery was so easy because, all the sort of, I wasn't diseased. I didn't have terrible childhood or past. I was just hungry. And the urges to binge were so compelling because my body was literally trying to keep me alive. And, and so once I understood that, and so obviously your thinking brain, okay, so I'm not sure how, so the animalistic part of the kind of brain, like the instincts that we, generate, they almost don't respond to reason. And so you just have to sit it through and like observe it as from like a third person perspective. At the same time, you kind of have to feed yourself so your body isn't stressed anymore. And so, yeah, it was pretty easy then onward. And I think a lot of women, men as well, but mostly women, are terribly misinformed. They are taught that something is wrong with them, that they are diseased. In fact, it's their healthy body trying to keep them alive, to be honest, not in a perfect way, because the businesses are not perfect in any way, but our bodies are survival machines. And in one way or another, your body will try to help you stay afloat, survive.
I think you would agree probably with the notion that most of these psychological disorders are actually metabolically driven, right? Like depression and bipolar and schizophrenia, all these serious things. A lot of them can be resolved through proper metabolic, feeding and bioenergetic principles, which is interesting because this is something that I was chasing this investigation alongside I was in the keto and low carb type world for years and knew all the players, still do. And, along the way, I met people like Dr. Chris Palmer from Harvard Psychiatry, who, he's getting people, alleviated of symptoms of schizophrenia by getting them in a ketogenic diet where they don't hear voices anymore. But the moment they go back to eating regular, the voices come back. So it's like these ketogenic approaches they're good like stopgap measures when that's all to just like remove but to do them long term, you have to stay on the the medicine, so to speak, of ketosis, which is something that long
Right.
term is going to have problems. And so the bioenergetic approach, I think, is a little harder for some people to get into and make it work because it's so different from what they're traditionally considering is, sugar is evil.
Mm.
But, and when you think, okay, I took the sugar away from my client, like Dr. Chris Palmer would say, and then he stopped hearing his voices. I bring the sugar back. He's hearing voices. The scapegoat
Right.
is the sugar, but it's not. It's the inability to process the sugar that's going on there.
That's usually the case. I think that, and also people who go on the ketogenic or carnivore diets, they usually remove a lot of other toxins. So they would remove, gums and preservatives and terrible things associated with, processed foods and terrible oils, etc. So they see improvement. They think, the carnivore diet or the ketogenic diet saved my life. And really, removing the poisons, what moved the needle, so to speak, and perhaps helping the body relearn how to metabolize sugar would be the best solution. Maybe not help relearn, but like unblock or like remove the blocks that are in place and that prevent you from, metabolizing sugar properly.
Mm-hmm. So for folks, because I have an audience that are here for various topics. It's not always bioenergetics. So for folks who are not familiar, can you speak a little bit about those metabolic blocks that you just mentioned and how to remove them?
Sure, of course. And so one of them would be avoiding sugar for prolonged periods of time. Another one would be just compromised metabolism, compromised thyroid function. Starvation, that would be in my case. And so removing them, a few things for me, probably the most, a few things actually helped. Thiamine, so vitamin B1, which is a key player in sugar metabolism. Huge help, huge help. Another one would be probably lowering fat, and not many people want to actually admit that to help your body relearn how to metabolize sugar, you probably want to cut down on fat. And I think that was Ray's idea as well, not just for weight loss, because people think, okay, well, I'm going on a high sugar diet, I should remove fat. Otherwise, if I don't want to lose weight, but I really want to fix my metabolism, I can fat max and sugar max simultaneously, pretty much. Well, that's not the case, because sugar and fat compete, obviously, for oxidation. And so if you want to help your body relearn how to oxidize sugar, it will be easier if you lower dietary fat, and not just, obviously, unsaturated fats, but saturated fats as well. So that's probably, I would say, lowering fat, obviously, removing all polyunsaturated and saturated fats, but also lowering fat, supplementing with thiamine, aspirin, maybe, thyroid, but not many people can get thyroid. I would say.
Do you use thyroid, or do you not take it, or you don't?
At the moment, yes,
Yeah.
I did not. I had a long break. I go back to it last week, 2 weeks ago, and there's a profound difference. But also, I would say, because not many people can get thyroid, but many people can get vitamin B1, and I also started using vitamin B1 2 or 3 days ago, after having, let's say, a 2-month break, and the difference is profound. I couldn't stop smiling. It was just so nice. And I think people argue that, our ancestors didn't use vitamin B1 or thyroid. Well, okay, fine. Our ancestors weren't vaccinated 72 times, weren't exposed to radiation 24/7, didn't eat terrible diet their entire life. They were not dealing with things that we have to deal. And so if you can help yourself, help your biology fight the really unfair fight against the modern environment by any means necessary, I would say go for it, or otherwise you might be regressing as an organism, to be honest. It's not a level playing field,
Yeah, and that's kind of a challenge to a lot of it has to be ancestral only crowd. there's a
Mm.
lot of truth in that world, but you can't be absolutist about that because you can miss out on some things your body might actually need. And I always say that the Bible begins in a garden and ends in a city. So there's something to be made and something to be constructed with the human mind that involves technology. And that might include things that can help us heal because of the bad use of technology, like bad drugs and bad food and all the other stuff. You mentioned avoiding fats. Do you think coconut oil is an exception to that rule, or does it itself, if you eat it in any significant quantity, also contribute to blocking people's metabolic improvement when they've come off of a mixed diet and standard diet?
Sure. So I think coconut oil might be an exception purely because it almost kind of metabolizes like sugars. It metabolizes really sort of it takes almost no time, and the mechanism appears to be similar. And so some people, like for example, this great guy called Thermobolic on Twitter. He is okay. Well, yes, he is on thyroid, on thyroid hormones, but he swears by eating tons of coconut oil with fruit and sugars, and sort of combining for weight loss and metabolic sort of efficiency. So it's hard for me to say.
Have you or anybody you know done A/B testing where they do like no fat or coconut oil only fat and seeing if it makes a difference, or no? I don't know.
I haven't actually seen any sort of not proper, just anecdotal evidence.
That was those were one of the perennial questions that I've always had since I got to know Ray Peat and started talking to him. Is like he would say, okay, avoid fat as much as you can, and then he would talk about this coconut, Ray Peat carrot salad thing. And I was like, okay, well, how much can I have of that? And then like, how much can I put in my coffee? Or, that's one of the things that I liked about the low carb world is that I realized, okay, if I go 30 carbs or less, I'm generally going to go in the direction that I want to go for this diet. But with Ray Peat, there's a lot more variables going on, right? Don't eat these things, but then coconut oil for your carrot thing, and then this thing and that. And I'm sure you probably have found, would you say, is the carrot salad the best thing that you've used in your toolkit from Ray Peat, or is there something else that stands above that, like thyroid or B1? What would you rank it?
Carrot salad is pretty powerful, but recently I've been finding more success with actually well-boiled mushrooms. And so I think Danny Roddy mentions the thing. He mentions that they have very similar sort of purposes. Is the gut cleansing, hormone balancing. However, the carrot salad might be better for people with diarrhea, and the mushrooms might be better for people with constipation. For some reason, I can't explain. I can't remember the reasons. And so I've been actually having a lot of, and so after a few days of eating well-cooked white button mushrooms, you sort of chop them up really nicely, add a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of salt, and you almost feel clearer, I would argue.
Do you drink the broth with that too, or do you just eat the mushrooms for people that want to try this at home?
I do both. Both. Sometimes I make really nice, lovely meals that mushrooms are part of them. Sometimes the salad. Success with both. But with regards to the most PT interventions that I really felt, obviously thyroid, progesterone, B1, so high doses actually thiamine. What else?
A lot of people like Thiamax on that, and I found that. Do you like that one, or is there one that does better for you for B1?
The Thiamax is good, although I think Thiamega, that's how you pronounce it, I think it's better. And so those are like the combined different types of B1. Some people argue it's too strong after a while. I find it great, not too strong at all, and you can feel a profound difference after taking it. It's like your body's clicking, working again. You can't stop smiling. It's just this warmth, and energy. And of course, sugar, of course, orange juice, the simple things.
How's the orange juice in London there? We're here in Florida,
It really depends. So we have the there's grocery stores. One is called Waitrose, the other Marks and Spencer, third one Sainsbury's. They all do French orange juice. Oh, great. But if you can get good oranges, doesn't happen a lot. But when the oranges are in season and you get great oranges and you squeeze the orange juice yourself, nothing compares. I would say
that's for sure.
not many things.
That is for sure. Yeah, it's a whole different. It's a whole different ball game when you can get fresh oranges. And I have a background in working. I have a background in working in the citrus industry. I had a citrus company, and there's nothing better than, like, we used to have a variety that's not as popular anymore called a honey tangerine, and the orange, the juice from it is like an amber, orange. It's beautiful.
Oh yes.
And it's so good if you heat it at all, though, because there's a few brands that tried to sell it and it just tastes like tomato juice or something. It just ruins it. So, and that's the same thing for good Valencia oranges or any of that. So, orange juice has always been a key component of the Ray Peat toolkit, as you mentioned. Is it because of what does it do for you? Do you use it as, I know we can get it your book, but is that you use it as like a meal, to just use orange juice as a foundation for a meal, or how do you use it?
I sip on it in between meals, with meals, after meals, before meals, any chance I get. It's just so good. It's people say it's sugar water. It's quite far from it. Right. It's the natural sugars, it's the B vitamins, it's the magnesium, the potassium, trace minerals in general. Right. It's medicinal. I think Ray mentioned that if he had to offer just one piece of longevity advice, he said sipping good sweet orange juice every second of your life. So if that's just one advice and it's orange juice, you might as well try doing it.
Right. Well, let's talk about, we're leading up kind of talking about some of the things you use, but you've put a book together with Anabology, the Fairy Princess Diet, or Fairy Prince Diet, right? So tell us a little bit about that and how that works for folks who might want to check that out.
Of course, yes. So the name, first of all, that came from Anabology's sister. She came up with it, and I thought for the first time, well, that's just ridiculous. It's not going to work. But then I thought to myself, it's actually almost too ridiculous, and it might work. Actually, it did. I think people, I'm receiving good feedback. Yeah. And so the Fairy Princess Diet is actually the honey diet that Anabology created. I contacted Anabology and asked him, well, look, I've been doing your honey diet for, 2 months now, and lost tons of weight. I have tons of energy. I'm feeling great. Would you like to maybe write a book together? And people actually, some people had an issue with it, with that being monetized. But the honey diet, which is the Fairy Princess Diet, like the blueprint is there. And we said that with Anabology. It's there on Anabology's, in his bio. No one is taking that away from you. It's always going to be for free. But if you want to support your favorite creators, get a meal plan, get recipes, get shopping lists, get then you can get it, but you don't have to. And so the honey of the Fairy Princess Diet is the sort of high sugar and also protein restriction, time restriction, not protein restriction at all, but time restriction, protein time restriction diet. And so how it works is that scientists discovered that if the body it gets a lot of sugar, but protein is restricted, a protein that sort of is called FGF21 raises, and that sort of skyrockets. It makes it really easy to lose weight. And so you restrict protein for the first, I would say 2/3 of the day, but still include gelatin. I think the first version of the honey diet was just honey, just sugar. And many people continue doing it this way. And I think adding gelatin, obviously gelatin is an incomplete protein, so it would not interfere with the protein restriction, but it adds the sort of calm. You're not too hyper. You're not too, I would say hyper is the right word. And so it adds the sort of calm. And also, I would say, protein is important for the liver, for example, to clear out estrogen, etc. In general, for the liver to work. And so by adding gelatin, I would argue it makes it really sort of safe and reasonable for a diet that sounds restrictive, which I don't think it should be. And so you eat the gelatin with the sugar for the first 2/3 of the day, and then you have a nourishing protein, either protein with fat or protein with sugar meal for dinner. And you have milk also before bed, because obviously we have to remember that Ray said that calcium should be, you should be mindful of your calcium intake. And so I think it's a great weight loss diet. Do I think it's great long term? It can be, but I don't think you would want to sort of just eat sugar and gelatin for prolonged periods of time. But it's extremely effective because you don't have to drop any calories. So most of the diet, like weight loss diets, they will tell you, oh, eat less and move more. The Honey or Fairy Princess diet says you don't have to drop calories, and you shouldn't actually. You can just be more like smarter about the not mixing the macros, not entering the macronutrient swampland, so to speak, and restricting protein, but still nourishing yourself, getting enough nutrients, enough calories for your metabolism to stay thriving, and even actually increase your sort of basal metabolic rate, as happened in my case. So right now I'm on 2,500 calories for a maintenance, and as we discussed before, I was gaining weight on 1,500 3 years ago. So it's great. It's
that's great.
pro-metabolic diet, and fantastic for people who want to lose weight.
And that's do you now? I know Anabology, in one of his early descriptions of it, he said that you have to have a period of kind of like burning off the sugar where you kind of fast. Do you incorporate that in your version of it, or do you think you just eat all the way up until dinner and then switch to your protein meal?
Yes.
Do you need a gap? Do you need a gap? Is the gap important to make it work, or no?
We thought so, and I thought, it takes 3 hours for sugar to metabolize completely, and so maybe it's a good idea for people to wait 3 hours before having that protein and fat-heavy dinner. But then we decided it might be maybe too difficult for people to be eating just a protein, just sugar and gelatin for such a long time, and then still have to wait 3 hours. And it works nevertheless. So then we dropped the sort of break and decided, you know what, just eat your just you don't need to have that break. And you also don't need to exercise. You can exercise in the morning, in the afternoon.
But if you eat protein at dinner and you want to have a fatty protein, then you should probably not eat carbs with it, right? You got to pick which. Yeah. Very cool. Now, a lot of people have now taken off. I want to get your reaction, since you're the co-founder with this Fairy Princess diet. There's this big thing that's blowing up more in another space, the YouTube world, that's outside of the bioenergetic world, with folks like Mark Bell, who is a bodybuilder, and Cole Robinson. They've been talking about sugar fasting and sugar diet, and they have different versions of it. Some of them do sugar all the way through with no protein. And and Cole Robinson has his shtick where he's telling people you can just go run through this for, if you have a lot of weight to lose, go 60 days sugar only, or sometimes he'll modify it to have a break whenever you want. But you see these guys popping up, and they have different variations. I want to hear your reaction to what they're doing. You're saying, if you've seen it.
I have, yes. So first of all, I remember Cole Robinson from my eating disorder days, and he had this thing called a snake juice diet. I think it was called the snake juice diet back in 2016 and 17. And that was the time. I was fasting as well. I mean, I've done so many water fasts, sadly. And so then he was eating rotten meat, etc. Yeah, I think.
Really?
Yes, I think sugar fasting is extremely helpful. If you have to do any kind of fasting, it's probably the safest. However, I still think even for the elimination of estrogen, the liver needs its protein. If not for anything else, you need some protein to help your liver work properly, detoxify, get rid of estrogen, etc. And so I think if you do it for prolonged periods of time and over again, you might run into issues. Is it the safe type of fast? I would say yes, yeah. If you do it for a day or two, might be fine. Personally, I've done sugar fasting a couple of times. After a day, you literally all you can think of is meat. And that brings me to my next point. It's not very pity if all you can think of is having meat. Quality of life, enjoyment of life.
Yeah.
If you're hating what you're doing,
Yeah.
even though it's sugar, it's pro-metabolic, it's helping you or whatever. If you're like, if you're all you can think about is meat, having a normal, comforting meal,
Yeah.
that's not pity at all. You're basically kind of torturing yourself, and that's not very Ray Peat coded.
Right. That's a good point. And people have complained about the possibility of like being in that type of stressful diet can impair your metabolic rate over time, which is strange
Oh, yeah.
because you think, well, if you're running pure sugar, that should be raising your metabolic rate, but you also, like you said, you need other materials besides sugar to, in the long term, be able to process all that sugar effectively, right? So it's
Yeah.
interesting. A lot of people talk about sleep issues on that diet as well, sugar fasting and having a hard time with sleep. Did you run into any sleep issues when you did your Fairy Princess protocol?
Fairy Princess, no, because you have first of all, I always did tons and tons of gelatin. And some people really miss out on that. They
I
do the
thought fairy
sugar
princes
fast.
are very busy at night doing all kinds of blessings and helping people with their wishes and stuff. They're not night owls? Not on this diet, huh? You go to sleep at a good
On this
hour?
side, on this side, you should be sleeping like a baby. And
Okay.
first of all, you need the sugar and gelatin diet. It's called sugar and gelatin for a reason. You should be having tons of gelatin. That's calming, stress lowering. Then you have your nourishing protein meal, and you have milk at bedtime, and you can add gelatin to your milk. You can, if you're having protein and sugar, you have honey milk, which is obviously almost the same sedative. Um, um, you can have gelatin milk, collagen milk, honey milk, and so and a nourishing protein meal. So never had sleep issues on a Fairy Princess diet with the pure sugar. I can imagine some people might run into those issues. Yes.
Very good.
Mm.
So, do you believe in having a gap between sleep time and drinking milk there and honey versus having a meal, or should you just kind of blend it all together? In terms of.
Um, I think having your dinner at, let's say, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock,
Mhm.
whatever time you like to have it,
Mhm.
and then let's say you go to sleep at 10:30 or 11, you have your milk at bedtime or as a sort of
Mhm.
but you can have it as dessert straight after dinner as well.
Mhm.
It's you can have panna cotta, which is milk and gelatin. I'm really heavy on the gelatin.
Yeah.
I
And
think
you're
more
known
people.
for your oxtail. That's good. You do a lot of stuff about oxtail, which is cool, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are you a
It's
fan of
delicious.
Vietnamese food, pho, and everything? You have plenty of those probably around there in London, right?
Every day almost.
Yeah.
What's your favorite oxtail recipe?
Oh, I haven't cooked it a lot myself. I tend
Mm-hmm.
to, whenever I can get over to a Vietnamese restaurant, I get the pho, and you just load it up with the tendon. I don't know what's in. I don't trust the little meatballs. I don't know what they put in them, so I say no meatballs, extra
Mm.
tendon in place of those little meatballs, and that's what I do.
Beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful. Mm.
that's a lot of fun. So,
But
yeah,
try. Maybe I'll send you some oxtail
okay,
recipes. Maybe you can try yourself.
yeah,
Some of
yeah.
them.
Another
Mm.
thing I like is menudo. Have you ever had that? It's a Mexican. You use beef hoof and beef tripe and some peppers and stuff like that. That's pretty good.
Would that be parts of the stomach, like
Yeah,
gizzards?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's the cow stomach. It's different parts of the cow stomach,
Right.
and then there's beef hoof. They take the hoof, and you just find, so you're just going through, and all of a sudden you see somebody's hoof come up. It's pretty, it's a bit startling for people who are not used to seeing a hoof come up in their soup. If they're used to chicken noodle soup from Campbell's, but it's pretty refreshing. And you put that with a little bit of the little puffed out corn hominy, they call it in Mexico. Put some cilantro on that. It's delicious. And that's very peaty. I know Ray Peat had that. He was over in Mexico all the time. He had to have had that. So, well, I want to talk just kind of, we've talked about some of the foundations, but, a lot of this really has to do with, we want a better world, right? We want a society that's not so psychopathically run and governed. We want people to be flourishing. We don't want people to be stuck on nostalgia to look at like what could be. Oh wow, look how nice it used to be. And that's something that was a fascinating thing for me to learn from this community, that the feeling of nostalgia and sentimentalism sometimes is your body yearning for an earlier period when your metabolic rate was more unencumbered and more alive, and so you remember those memories with that happy feeling. And I think it's so fascinating that a society that's stuck in the past is a society that's metabolically broken in the present, right?
Yearning for the childlike state,
right?
Maybe. I think Nate Lawrence had a beautiful tweet once that said, the past is already that we're not. Well, it's not happening again, and bioenergetics is about adapting to the present, sort of taking the best you can from the past, but not sort of romanticizing it too much, as in like, oh, we have to return to the way things were before. I think a great quality, or like the most important quality of a biological organism is the ability to adapt to the environment that it finds itself in at present, and that's how we survive. That's how we have to adapt. And so all those things, all those people who maybe, oh no, let's return to the past, let's return to the way things were in the past. Well, that's not happening. Maybe the question we should be asking is, how can we not only survive but thrive in the environment that we're in at the moment? What are the best solutions? What are the best sort of interventions? Maybe eating sort of ancestral diet and not taking any supplements, just eating raw meat and etc. was great back then. Maybe taking thyroid hormones and B vitamins and aspirin is good now, considering the environment we are in at present and the challenges we have to overcome.
Right. I say that politics is downstream from thyroid. So we have to be able to get people, if we want to live in a society that's less violent and less deranged, it has to start with that metabolic rate that we all have. And I have to commend you for doing what you can to promote this to a larger audience outside of, let's face it, in the bioenergetic world, you have folks who are so learned that they know a level of biochemistry that the average person it's just not familiar with. And you've been able to distill a lot of these things in an effective way, and you've been able to reach a lot of people that way. So we all want that, because I was attracted to Ray Peat's ideas from the political context too. I mean, he talked about, how difficult it was to organize dissident voices and groups. And he said that's the biggest challenge, is being able to organize. And he used his dietary principles as a kind of starting point to try to heal people, knowing that they would then, I guess, organize about those healing principles. And then as they raise their metabolic rate, become the organizers for a better future. So it's kind of a political revolution. Is that how big your ambition goes with what you're doing? Or do you just want to stick strictly to just healing people, and that, because there's nothing wrong with either way. Some people just, to get one person healed is their ambition. And then other people are like, no, I want to see a political revolution and I'm here for it.
I think the goal is to raise collective consciousness in general. I had this conversation actually earlier today. So many people, you walk around and you see people sedated, asleep. That's due to many things. And you sort of, I know I talk about nutrition, but oftentimes it starts with nutrition, it starts with lifestyle, it starts with the simple things, and then you suddenly, I don't know, become aware of and start sort of more digging. I wrote this piece on serotonin the other day, how it makes you docile and domesticated and not trying to escape anymore, not asking questions, and how that's kind of ideal if you wanted to enslave a population as a whole, just hook them on serotonin or like and I think breaking free from that sort of learned helplessness state, as Ray spoke about, I think that's what's needed for people to kind of start asking questions again, start demanding things, start sort of like, I don't know, refuse and like the sedation, and like wake up and like realize that you're being kind of taken advantage of, really. And also it's a political matter, but also just free your soul. Like, I mean, it's like you don't know how great you can be as a person, as a sort of spiritual being, and when you're asleep, when you're sedated.
Yeah. How does your view of God fit with your view of the bioenergetic path that you're on? I mean, you just mentioned that spiritual element there. How do you see those connected?
Sure. I was raised Roman Catholic, and had a tiny little period break when I'm sort of rebelling, maybe as a sort of older teenager. But apart from that, that was my upbringing. I think that good metabolism is something that brings you closer to God, to the divine, almost like you're one with the divine. It makes you a better person, brings you definitely closer to God. And Ray and Carl Jung and Nietzsche, they all speak about those things, about the childlike stage, or like the eternal boy, or like I think that's been discussed. That's sort of my opinion.
The kingdom of heaven is like children. That's what Jesus said. So that would be a high state.
Indeed. And I think that's just incredible that Jesus said, as you mentioned, you have to become like little children to enter the kingdom of heaven. And then Ray Peat's entire philosophy is about returning to the childlike metabolic state. Yeah.
And I also like how Ray talks about this biological premise that we were meant to live forever, which is very Christian, really. You know what I mean? That there's this rejection of entropy as a kind of psyop by people who want us to believe you only have so many heartbeats, so don't do anything that raises your heartbeat too fast. That's like there's an anti-aging community that likes to do that. Like you have to divvy up your heartbeats, and then there's this, we can only get glimpses of the past with ancestral diet. We can only, in terms of the good old days, it's always the golden age is behind us. Whereas Jesus's first miracle is the best wine is at the end, which is a total attack against that view of history, right? Which is like the best is yet to come, not just for yourself, but the human species and the planet Earth and everything that we do with it, right?
I completely agree. Yes.
Right. So how do you navigate between, in the theological sense, we call that already not yet. We're already, the kingdom of heaven has arrived, but it's not yet complete. How do you navigate becoming like a child while you have psychopaths all around you trying to, as you've mentioned before, draw you into stress or raise your cortisol? I think don't you have I saw you have a hat on your website, don't raise my cortisol, right? So how do you become a child like the kingdom of heaven, but still be on guard against cortisol and all this type of stuff?
I think the key difference, we have to differentiate between being childish and being childlike.
Right.
Childish is naive and childish. Not so sure what other words I can use to describe that state. And childlike is just having sort of being whimsical,
Right.
and happy and joyful,
Right.
as opposed to whatever else we're experiencing. What's the opposite that we're experiencing? People, sedation. I think childlike would be the opposite of sedation, would be the sort of youthfulness and joy and those things.
Right.
And there is a profound difference. So let's not be naive,
Yeah.
but let's definitely be whimsical and
Yeah.
joyful.
Yeah.
Mm.
Ray said, that, I think in some place, that the future of humanity will look a little more female.
Interesting.
And that's interesting, because then you have like the Hillary Clinton archetype where she says the future is female. You say, well, how could those two people say something, but they mean totally different? They do.
Totally different things.
Where
Mhm.
I could you explain that for audiences, like this estrogenic Hillary Clinton model of the future is female versus the progesterone future is female concept that maybe Ray had in mind, where there's maybe you could help people understand that.
Let me think about it, because I haven't heard of that concept. So okay, maybe in a sense that progesterone really is sort of life-giving and life-saving, both for females and males. And so, how would you interpret that?
Well, how does having a higher progesterone to estrogen make your disposition? Are you more easy to forgive? Are you more easy to love, to not hold grudges? If you look at the fruit of the spirit,
Yeah.
right? Love keeps no record of wrongs. It does not, no, this concept of a high metabolic rate should associate with a happier,
With
more
progesterone.
pleasant, joyful
Mhm.
humanity that's
Mhm.
more whimsical, more creative, which is kind of the
Mhm.
best attributes of females versus the Hillary Clinton model, where it's stress and it's estrogenic and it's kind of
That in that
there's
sense,
two
yeah.
different ways of looking at a female
Mhm.
uh, experience. Most people encounter the stress one because that's the one promoted by society in a kind of psyop.
Yeah, in that sense, no, yeah, I see precisely what you mean. I hope that our future is progesterone.
Right.
I,
I mean, any vision where the lion is laying down the lamb would have to be kind of progesterone, like, in terms of that
Mhm.
flourishing, right? So,
Sure.
well, I appreciate your time, Veronica. It's been great talking with you. I think that you've laid out a lot of different things for people to think about, and thanks for sharing a little bit of your journey for those who may have not been familiar with it. I think that's cool to see people willing to put their stuff out there and share their triumphs and failures and mistakes or things they learned along the way when it comes to whenever you do that, you're going to take arrows, and you've taken some arrows. I know a lot of folks who put themselves out there do. So I appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate you, and honored to be invited. I appreciate what you're doing as well. Having conversation with really valuable people, politicians and nutritionists and Ray Peat people. And I love your podcast, and it's an honor. It really is. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming on, and let's do it again sometime. And
Of course.
we'll have you on again sometime to talk about what people can do. I think make America healthy again. There's a lot of stuff we could do there. Like you said, a lot of
Yes.
countries are looking at what America's doing, and they want to imitate what we're doing. So this is a great opportunity to exploit that advantage we might have with Robert Kennedy there. So thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you.
Not the